The galaxy had always been a place of turmoil, where politics, power, and pride ruled. Across the stars, there were endless empires, factions, and species, each vying for control, respect, and survival. But in the midst of this cosmic struggle, one story was unfolding that no one could have predicted. A story of mercy, courage, and an unexpected bond between two very different beings. Amara was the last surviving member of a royal family, once revered as mighty rulers of their world, Veradia. Her people, an ancient race known for their strength and wisdom, had long been the dominant force on their planet. But that was before everything changed. Now, they were divided, fractured by betrayal and internal strife. The warlords of her world had fought to take her throne, and in the end, her own family had turned against her, casting her aside like a forgotten relic. Her people had deemed her weak, an embarrassment, and when the Galactic Empire arrived to conquer Veradia, they decided that the best way to solidify their victory was to eliminate the last of the royal line. Her, alone, abandoned, and left for dead, Amara had barely managed to survive the attack on her palace. She was exiled, forced to flee into the wild, a shadow of her former self. Now on the desolate world of Veranis, her life was slipping away. Her body was battered and bruised, her clothes torn from the harsh environment. The icy winds cut through her skin, and she shivered with each breath. The once great princess had become a mere casualty in the grand game of galactic politics. There was no one left to save her, and she had accepted her fate. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. A human vessel, carrying a small medical team, was on its way to a nearby planet when it suffered a critical malfunction. The ship's engines sputtered and faltered, sending the crew into a desperate scramble to make an emergency landing. The planet they found themselves on was remote and uninhabited, with nothing but rocky plains and barren fields stretching as far as the eye could see. A perfect place to land without attracting the attention of the Empire's forces, but still dangerous. Dr. Samuel Klein, the ship's lead medic, had been preparing for a routine mission, but nothing in his training had prepared him for what he would encounter on Veranis 7. His team worked quickly to assess the damage to their vessel, but Klein's mind kept wandering. There was something about the planet that felt wrong, empty, as if it held a dark secret. He couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't the only ones there. As he stepped outside, his boots crunching on the rocky ground, he noticed something in the distance. A figure, small, frail, barely visible against the backdrop of the desolate landscape. The figure was lying motionless, face down, barely moving. Klein's heart skipped a beat. Instinctively, he motioned for his team to follow him as he made his way toward the figure. It wasn't long before Klein reached her. She was an alien, unlike any he had ever seen. Her skin was a pale, almost translucent shade of blue, and her features were delicate, sharp yet graceful. Her long silver hair was matted with dirt, and her once glorious clothing was torn beyond recognition. She looked like she had been abandoned, left to die without a second thought. Klein knelt beside her, his mind racing. She was breathing, but barely. Her pulse was weak, and her body temperature dangerously low. He quickly assessed her condition, knowing that if he didn't act fast, she wouldn't survive. He looked around at his team, but their expressions were filled with skepticism. "She's one of them," one of his crew members muttered, casting a wary glance at the alien princess. "We don't have time for this, Klein. She's probably a trap." But Klein ignored them. In that moment, all he could see was a person, a living, breathing being in need of help. Her royal status, her alien origins, none of it mattered. She needed medical attention, and Klein couldn't turn his back on her. "Get the medical supplies," Klein ordered. "We need to stabilize her now." His voice was firm, his determination unwavering. The team hesitated, exchanging uneasy glances, but Klein's commanding presence left little room for argument. They set to work, quickly establishing a makeshift medical camp. Klein worked tirelessly, setting up an IV drip, warming blankets, and using his equipment to monitor her vitals. He was so focused on her care that he didn't notice the others watching him, their doubts still lingering in the air. Amara, barely conscious, felt warmth for the first time in what felt like an eternity. She had been drifting in and out of consciousness, her mind clouded by the toxic poison coursing through her veins, but now she felt the gentle touch of someone caring for her. She wanted to resist, to pull away, but the sensation of being cared for was so foreign to her that she couldn't fight it. It was a feeling she had forgotten existed. As Klein worked, his thoughts were a mix of curiosity and disbelief. He had read about the Varadians, but nothing could have prepared him for seeing one in person. Their species was known for their intelligence, their power, and their ancient history. Yet here she was, lying helpless before him. He couldn't understand why anyone would want her dead. To him, she was simply another person in need. Klein's team looked on with growing unease as he continued his work. "She's not one of us," one of them remarked, his voice tight with discomfort. "You don't know what she's capable of." But Klein shook his head. "She's a living being, just like us. And right now, she needs us." As the hours passed, Klein's work began to pay off. The alien princess's condition slowly stabilized, her breathing becoming more regular, her heart rate stronger. Klein could feel the tiniest flicker of hope. He had saved many lives before, but there was something different about this one, something that felt important. And as the night settled over Varanus 7, Klein couldn't help but feel that this was no mere accident. This was destiny. For in that moment, the paths of a human medic and an alien princess had crossed in the most unlikely of ways, and nothing would ever be the same again. The hours passed by slowly, but Klein didn't mind. His focus was entirely on the fragile alien princess before him. The faint hum of the medical equipment was the only sound breaking the silence. His team had fallen quiet, each of them watching with growing uncertainty as the situation unfolded. Klein, however, was determined. The moment he had stabilized her condition, he had set to work uncovering the source of her injuries. Her body, though clearly weakened, was resilient. Her pale blue skin, though marred by cuts and bruises, had an almost unnatural quality to it. Klein had encountered countless species in his time as a medic, but this one was different. Her anatomy didn't fit with any medical textbook he had ever seen. "Doc, is she going to make it?" one of his crew members asked, his voice low, almost afraid to hear the answer. Klein paused, his fingers hovering over the alien's wrist. "She's stable for now, but I still need to understand more. I need to know how to treat her properly," he answered, his mind already racing with the possibilities. Her body was alien, and that meant Klein couldn't rely on the standard procedures he'd been trained in. The team gathered around Klein, exchanging nervous glances. They had come to assist in a routine mission, not to become involved in some intergalactic medical crisis. But the sight of Amara, still unconscious and breathing steadily under Klein's care, made it clear that their world was about to change in ways they could never have anticipated. After several hours of monitoring, Klein finally sat back, wiping his brow. The alien princess was still unconscious, but her breathing had normalized. Klein's instincts told him she was a survivor, despite the odds. Her heart rate, although initially erratic, had settled into a steady rhythm. Klein couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that he had just uncovered a small piece of a much larger story. This alien, this princess, was no ordinary being. There was something about her, something that stirred a deep curiosity inside him. But for now, he focused on keeping her alive. The rest of the crew began to discuss their next steps. They needed to figure out a way to repair their ship and leave Varanus 7 before the Galactic Empire's forces found them. Yet, amid the chatter, one thing remained clear. None of them could bring themselves to abandon the alien girl they had found. "Doc, you need to stop playing hero," said Sergeant Hill, his voice firm, but not unkind. "We don't know what kind of trouble we've gotten ourselves into by saving her. Those Empire people, they won't stop until she's dead." "I didn't ask for your permission," Klein snapped, surprising even himself. He had spoken without thinking, But as soon as the words left his mouth, he realized how much they reflected his own feelings. I couldn't just leave her. She's hurt. She's a person. We're not leaving her to die. Hill fell silent. The tension between the two men was palpable, but Klein was resolute. In the end, it wasn't a soldier's orders that guided him, but his own conscience. As the crew worked on the ship, Klein spent more time studying Amara. His medical knowledge told him that she was no ordinary species. Her body, though fragile, had an incredible potential for regeneration. Each time he checked her wounds, they seemed to be healing faster than normal. A deep cut on her leg had already started to close, the tissue rapidly knitting itself back together. Klein had read stories about alien species with regenerative abilities, but seeing it firsthand was something else entirely. It was a reminder of just how little humanity knew about the vast universe it inhabited. This princess was something extraordinary, and Klein couldn't help but wonder just how many others like her existed. In the quiet moments when he sat by her side, Klein couldn't ignore the growing bond he felt for her. Her features, although foreign, were undeniably beautiful. He found himself studying her face, the sharp angles of her cheekbones, the delicate curve of her lips, and the long, silken strands of her hair. There was a sadness in her expression, even when she was unconscious. It was a sadness that he couldn't ignore, and it made him want to learn more about her. But Klein also knew that he couldn't afford to become emotionally involved. His mission was to save lives, not to get entangled in the politics of distant worlds. And yet, the more he cared for her, the more he realized how deeply her fate was tied to his own. Hours turned into days, and Amara began to stir. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing pools of silver that shimmered with a mix of confusion and fear. Klein was sitting by her side, his eyes trained on her face as she slowly regained consciousness. Her breathing was steady now, her body no longer fighting against the damage it had suffered. But she was still weak, and the confusion in her eyes told Klein that her mind was still trying to piece together what had happened. "Where am I?" Amara's voice was soft, hoarse from dehydration, but there was a strength in it. It was the voice of someone who had known loss, but still had the will to survive. "You're safe," Klein replied gently, offering her a reassuring smile. He had no idea if she understood his words, but he knew he needed to try. "You're with me. We're going to help you." She blinked, trying to make sense of her surroundings. Her gaze locked on Klein's, and for a moment, she said nothing. It was as if she was searching his face for something. Trust, perhaps. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, she spoke again. I remember," she whispered. "They left me to die. My people, they abandoned me." Klein's heart broke at the words. He had known that the princess had suffered, but hearing her say it so plainly struck him with an overwhelming sense of empathy. She had been betrayed by those she had trusted most, her own people. "You're not alone anymore," Klein said quietly. "You're safe here. We'll figure this out." Amara's eyes softened, a flicker of something like hope crossing her features. It was small, but it was there. And for Klein, it was enough. He didn't know what the future held or what role Amara would play in the grand scheme of things, but he knew one thing for certain. She wasn't alone anymore. The days that followed were quiet, but filled with a kind of tension that none of them could ignore. The crew of the medical ship had made their camp on Varanus 7, waiting for the repairs to their vessel to be completed. But the real work, it seemed, was happening in the small, makeshift medical bay where Dr. Klein and Princess Amara spent most of their time. Klein had started speaking to her more frequently, even though the language barrier was still an obstacle. He had learned a few words in her tongue, slowly piecing together enough to communicate with her, though it was still far from perfect. Despite the difficulties, Amara seemed to understand him, and that was enough. Their conversations, however brief, began to form an unspoken bond between them. Amara's health was improving steadily. Her once pale and lifeless skin had regained some color, and the sharp, exhausted look in her eyes began to soften. She was still fragile, but each day she seemed more like her former self. The regenerative ability Klein had observed in her was astonishing. Her wounds, once deep and severe, were healing at a pace that Klein had never witnessed before in any species. Despite her growing strength, Amara was still haunted by the events of her past. There were nights when Klein found her staring out into the distance, her gaze distant and unreadable. He had learned, little by little, about her history, the fall of her kingdom, the betrayal of her own people, and the brutal decision to leave her to die. It was a story of abandonment, of heartbreak, and of a princess who had been cast aside, as if she were nothing. The more Klein learned about Amara's story, the more he understood the weight she carried. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a symbol of everything her people had lost. She had been raised to rule, to lead her people through tough times, but instead, she had been left alone in the wilderness, forgotten by those who once called her their leader. One evening, after a long day of work, Klein found Amara sitting alone near a small fire outside the camp. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the barren landscape. He approached cautiously, unsure if she wanted company. But when she saw him, her expression softened, and she motioned for him to sit beside her. "Do you ever miss home?" Klein asked, his voice gentle. Amara's eyes flickered to the horizon, as if searching for something that wasn't there. "Home," she repeated, as though the word itself was foreign. "I don't know if I remember what home truly feels like anymore." Klein sat beside her, watching the fire crackle. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was a shared understanding. She didn't need to explain further for Klein to understand the depth of her pain. He had seen it in her eyes ever since he first found her. It was a look he knew well. Loss, grief, the quiet acceptance that something once important was gone and could never be recovered. Amara turned her gaze toward him. "I was never meant to be weak," she said softly. "I was supposed to lead, to bring my people back to greatness. But instead, I became a burden. I became a symbol of everything that went wrong." Klein shook his head, his voice firm. "You're not a burden. You were betrayed, yes, but that's not your fault. And you're not alone anymore." Amara was quiet for a moment, as if considering his words. Finally, she spoke again. You're different from everyone else I've met. You don't see me as an enemy, as something to fear. You see me as a person." "Why?" Klein looked at her, his eyes steady. "Because that's what you are. A person. A living, breathing person who deserves to be treated with respect." Amara's eyes softened, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I don't know if I deserve that anymore." "You do," Klein replied, his tone unwavering. "You deserve everything." For a moment, they sat in silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The fire crackled softly, the only sound between them. Klein had always believed in the importance of human life. As a medic, he had devoted himself to saving those in need, no matter their background or species. But Amara, she was different. There was something in her that called to him, something that made him want to fight for her, protect her, even if it meant defying everything he had been taught. As the days passed, the bond between Klein and Amara grew stronger. She shared more of her story, and Klein shared his. The princess spoke of her childhood, of the dreams she once had of uniting her people, of bringing peace to a galaxy that had been torn apart by war. Klein spoke of Earth, his family, his training, and why he had become a medic in the first place. They were worlds apart, yet their stories seemed to intertwine in a way neither of them could deny. But despite the deepening connection between them, there were still moments of uncertainty. Amara had a past she couldn't escape, and Klein had a duty that kept him tied to his mission. Both of them were torn between their growing feelings for each other and the responsibilities that loomed over them. It was one evening, as Klein tended to her injuries, that Amara spoke again. "You're different, Dr. Klein. Most humans would have left me for dead. Why didn't you?" Klein paused for a moment, his hands hovering over the bandages. He had thought about this a lot. Because I don't believe in leaving anyone behind, no matter who they are, no matter what they've done. You're worth saving, Amara. Her eyes softened at his words, and for the first time, Klein saw something in her that had been missing. Hope. It was a fragile thing, but it was there. A small flicker of it, like a candle in the darkness. And in that moment, Klein knew. He wasn't just saving her from physical wounds. He was helping her heal in ways that went far beyond the surface. He was giving her something she hadn't had in a long time. Belief in herself. The days spent on Varanus 7 grew more tense with each passing moment. The repairs on the medical ship were nearing completion, and the crew had grown restless, eager to leave the barren world behind. Yet the quiet peace they had found during their stay was about to be shattered. As the ship's systems hummed with life, Dr. Samuel Klein couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't as alone as they had hoped. Despite the progress in Amara's recovery, Klein couldn't ignore the reality that they were far from safe. The galaxy was vast, and the Empire was ruthless. They had sent assassins to kill Amara once before, and it was only a matter of time before they tried again. Klein had spent days tending to the princess, watching her grow stronger. Her regenerative abilities amazed him, but they also worried him. The more he learned about her, the more he realized just how important she was to the Empire's plans. She wasn't just the last of her royal line. She was a symbol of everything the Empire sought to control. One evening, as the sun set over the desolate landscape, Klein found himself pacing near the ship, his mind racing. He couldn't escape the nagging feeling that the Empire was watching them. He had seen the dark ships that occasionally passed overhead, out of sight but close enough to make him uneasy. They were out there, waiting. His thoughts were interrupted when Amara appeared beside him, her movements graceful despite the weakness that still lingered in her body. She had been outside, taking in the fresh air as she slowly regained her strength. Her once hollow eyes now held a new kind of clarity, though there was still a sadness behind them. It was a sadness Klein knew well, one born from betrayal and loss. Dr. Klein. Amara's voice was soft, but firm. You're worried. Klein turned to face her, his brow furrowed. I can't shake the feeling that we're being hunted. The Empire won't just let us go. They'll come for us again. And this time, they won't hesitate. Amara's expression darkened, and she nodded slowly. I know, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I've known since the moment I was abandoned. My people, they see me as a threat, something to be erased. They will never stop until I am gone. Klein could feel the weight of her words settle between them, heavy with truth. She had seen the cruelty of her own people firsthand. She had felt the sting of betrayal, and now she was paying the price for it. It was a pain Klein couldn't fully understand, but he could feel it in the depths of his heart. We can't run forever, he said quietly, and I won't let you die again. Amara looked at him, her silver eyes reflecting the dying light of the sun. There was a long pause, as if she were searching for something in his gaze. Finally, she spoke. I don't want to run anymore, she said, her voice steady, though tinged with uncertainty. But I don't know how to fight. I was never trained for war. I don't even know how to protect myself. Klein took a step closer to her, his gaze intense. You don't have to fight alone, he said firmly. You have me. And you have your people. You're not just a princess anymore, Amara. You're a leader. Your people are out there, waiting for you to lead them. You're stronger than you know. Amara's gaze faltered for a moment. She lowered her head, as if the weight of Klein's words was too much to bear. But after a moment, she raised her chin and met his eyes again. There was something new in her expression, determination. I don't know if I can lead them, she admitted, but I know that I can't stay hidden forever. I won't live in fear of what they'll do to me. I have to make a choice. Klein nodded. Then we'll face it together. Before she could respond, a distant sound reached their ears, a low hum, like the sound of an approaching ship. Klein's heart raced. He turned toward the ship, his instincts screaming that something was wrong. Amara followed his gaze, her eyes narrowing in the direction of the sound. "Who's coming?" she asked, her voice tense. "I don't know," Klein said, his hand instinctively moving to the communicator at his belt. "But I have a feeling it's not good." The hum grew louder, and Klein quickly signaled to the crew to prepare for possible confrontation. He knew the Empire wouldn't waste time. If they had found them, there would be no negotiation. There would only be violence. Amara's hand gripped Klein's arm, her fingers cold but steady. "What should we do?" she asked, her voice calm despite the fear that radiated from her. Klein turned to her, his expression firm. "We prepare for the worst, and we fight to survive." Within moments, the crew had gathered, weapons ready and eyes filled with determination. They had been through battles before, but this was different. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for freedom. Klein turned to Amara, his eyes softening. "I won't let them take you. Not now, not ever." She nodded, her face hardening with resolve. "Then let's show them what happens when they mess with the wrong people." The ship's engines roared to life, and the crew moved swiftly into position. The distant hum was now unmistakably the sound of multiple ships, closing in fast. Klein's team readied their weapons, their focus sharp. They knew this could be the end, but they weren't going down without a fight. As the ships began to descend, Klein felt his heart race. The first wave of enemies was on its way. The galaxy may have thought that a human medic and a fallen princess could be crushed easily, but they were wrong. The Empire would soon learn that humanity wasn't something to be taken lightly. They had underestimated both Klein and Amara. "Here they come," Klein whispered to himself, but his voice was filled with more determination than fear. And as the sky darkened with the shadow of the approaching ships, the crew stood united, ready to face whatever came next. The battle for Amara's life, and for the future of an entire world, was about to begin. The first signs of the incoming attack were subtle at first. The distant hum of engines had grown louder, but it wasn't until the sky above Varanus 7 darkened with the shadow of multiple ships that the crew realized how close the danger had come. Klein stood at the edge of the makeshift camp, his heart pounding as he watched the ships descend from the sky. There were at least 5 of them, sleek and menacing. Their black exteriors gleamed ominously in the low light, and the Empire's insignia was unmistakable. The assassins had arrived. The crew had only minutes to prepare, and yet Klein felt as if time itself had slowed down. The medical team, trained in saving lives, was now about to face a test they were never prepared for. They were not soldiers, not warriors. They were healers. But in that moment, they had no choice. They would have to fight if they wanted to survive. "Everyone to your stations," Klein barked, his voice carrying authority as he turned toward the crew. "We've trained for emergencies, and this is as real as it gets. Arm yourselves. We need to hold them off until the ship is ready to leave." The crew scrambled into action, gathering weapons from the ship's supplies and positioning themselves around the camp. Klein made sure that Amara, though still recovering, was safe. He wasn't going to let her get caught in the crossfire, no matter what. The princess had come too far to be lost now. Amara, however, was not one to sit idly by. Despite her weakened state, she stood beside Klein, her silver eyes burning with defiance. "I'm not running away, Dr. Klein. You've given me the chance to live, but I won't hide anymore. My people need me." Klein hesitated, his eyes searching her face. He could see the fire in her, the same fire he had seen in her eyes when they first met. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She had become a symbol of resistance, of strength. He knew she wouldn't back down. "Then we fight together," Klein said, his voice steady. "But stay close to me. I'll make sure you're safe." The ships grew closer, their engines rumbling like thunder. The ground beneath them trembled as they touched down, their massive forms blocking out the last light of the setting sun. Klein's heart raced, but he didn't allow fear to take over. He had no time for fear, not when lives were at stake. The enemy soldiers began to pour out of the ships, Well-trained, highly disciplined warriors who were used to taking what they wanted. They were armed with advanced weapons, each one an expert in combat. But the crew of the medical ship had something that the Empire didn't expect: heart. Klein and the crew quickly took positions, using the terrain to their advantage. They knew the planet better than anyone, and they used that knowledge to outmaneuver the attackers. The first shots rang out, and the battle began. Amara stood by Klein's side, her eyes focused on the enemies advancing toward them. Despite the chaos, she remained calm, her every movement purposeful. She had been trained as a leader, not a fighter, but in this moment, she found the strength to do what was necessary. With Klein's guidance, she found her place in the battle, directing the crew and giving orders with surprising authority. "Keep your heads down," Klein shouted as a blast of gunfire echoed nearby. The crew returned fire, using the terrain to create cover and surprise the enemy at every turn. It wasn't easy, but they were managing to hold their ground. Klein had never imagined he would be in a situation like this. He had always seen himself as a healer, someone who brought peace, not conflict. But now, as the shots rang out and the sound of combat filled the air, he realized that sometimes survival required more than medicine. It required strength, courage, and the willingness to fight for what was right. As the battle raged on, Klein's thoughts kept returning to Amara. He had come to care deeply for her, not just as a patient, but as a person. She had suffered so much, and yet here she was, standing tall in the face of impossible odds. She had never asked for this life, yet now she was choosing to fight for it. And in that moment, Klein knew that he would do whatever it took to keep her alive, no matter the cost. The enemy began to push forward, their numbers overwhelming. It seemed like the tide was turning against them, but just when all hope seemed lost, a shift occurred. Amara stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Listen to me," she commanded, her voice unwavering. "This is our world. We will not be ruled by fear. If we fight together, we will survive." Her words struck a chord with the crew. They had been fighting to survive, but now they were fighting for something bigger, for a chance to change the fate of not just Amara, but for anyone who had ever been oppressed, for anyone who had ever been cast aside. Klein looked at her, a fierce pride swelling in his chest. She was no longer the helpless princess he had first met. She was a leader, and this was her moment. She had the power to unite them all, to show them that even in the face of overwhelming odds, they had the strength to fight back. As Amara's words rang out, the crew rallied. They fought harder, their resolve growing stronger with each passing minute. The Empire's soldiers began to falter, their confidence shaken by the resistance they hadn't expected. They thought they could crush a group of weaklings, but they had underestimated humanity. And they had underestimated Amara. Klein, despite the chaos around him, felt a surge of hope. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were winning. The battle raged on for hours, but slowly the tides turned. The Empire's forces were driven back, their once confident march slowing as they encountered more resistance than they had bargained for. Klein and Amara fought side by side, both determined not to let the other fall. And through their efforts, the enemy began to retreat. By the time the dust settled, the camp was littered with the signs of battle: broken weapons, abandoned armor, and the quiet aftermath of a fight well fought. The crew was battered, but they were alive. They had won. Klein stood beside Amara, his body weary, but his spirit lifted by the victory. "We did it," he said, his voice rough from the battle. Amara turned to him, her silver eyes shining with a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. "No, we did it," she replied. "We fought for our future." And for the first time since she had been abandoned, Amara smiled. A real smile, one filled with hope and determination. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was a leader. And together, they had fought for something worth believing in. The battle had been hard and long, but in the end, the crew of the medical ship had managed to hold their ground. The Empire's forces had been forced to retreat, their pride and power shaken by the fierce resistance they had faced. The once certain victory that the Empire had expected was now a distant memory. But despite the triumph, a sense of unease lingered in the air. They had won, but the fight was far from over. Klein stood at the edge of the camp, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The sound of the distant ships that had retreated still echoed in his mind, the reminder that the Empire would return. And when they did, the stakes would be even higher. It was only a matter of time before reinforcements arrived, and when they did, they would be even stronger, more relentless. Klein knew that they couldn't afford to stay on Varanus 7 any longer. "We need to leave," Klein said, his voice firm, yet heavy with the weight of the decision. "The repairs are almost done. We can't risk being caught here again." His words were met with murmurs of agreement from the crew. They had been through enough to understand the gravity of the situation. The victory they had just achieved was a small one in the grand scheme of things, but it was one that had bought them time. Time they needed to escape before the Empire returned with greater force. But as Klein turned to look at Amara, he saw the uncertainty in her eyes. She had fought alongside them, her strength and leadership inspiring everyone around her. But now, it was clear that she was torn. Amara stood beside him, her posture straight, though the exhaustion from the battle still clung to her. Her once pale skin now had a healthy glow to it, a sign of her recovery, but there was something else in her expression, a quiet sadness, a reluctance to leave. "I can't leave," Amara said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not yet. My people, they need me. I can't run away again. I won't." Klein turned to face her, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. He had come to understand her more than he ever thought he would. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was a symbol of resistance, of hope for the people she had once ruled. But Klein knew that there was more at stake now than just this survival of a single planet. If Amara stayed, she would be risking everything. "You don't have to do this alone," Klein said, his voice steady but filled with concern. "We're not running away. We're just regrouping. We need to find a safe place, somewhere we can plan our next move. You can't fight if you're dead, Amara." Amara met his gaze, her eyes filled with determination. She had faced betrayal, abandonment, and the loss of everything she had once known. And yet, in the face of all that, she had found the strength to fight back. But now, the weight of her responsibility was pressing down on her shoulders once more. "I can't leave my people behind," she said, her voice firm, but the vulnerability in her eyes was clear. "If I run, they will never follow me. If I leave now, they will think I've abandoned them again. I can't afford that." Klein knew that her heart was set on this. He could see it in her eyes. She wasn't afraid to fight, but she was afraid of failing her people. He could understand that fear. It was the same fear that had driven him to do everything in his power to help her, even when it seemed hopeless. But Klein also knew that there was a price to be paid for everything. Staying on Varanus 7 would mean certain destruction. If the Empire returned, they would not hesitate to destroy everything in their path, including Amara. They had already tried once, and they would not stop until they succeeded. "We can't afford to wait," Klein said softly, his voice filled with a quiet urgency. "If we stay, we risk everything. You know that." Amara stood silently, her gaze shifting from Klein to the horizon. She was torn, caught between the duty she felt to her people and the reality that the galaxy was a much larger place than she had ever imagined. She had fought for so long, but now she was faced with a choice that would define her future. For a long moment, she said nothing, her mind racing. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "I'll go with you," she said quietly, "but only until we can find a way to help my people. I can't just walk away from them. If I'm going to lead, I need to be with them. I can't expect them to follow someone who hides from the truth." Klein nodded, understanding the depth of her decision. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about leadership, responsibility, and the courage to face the consequences of her actions. He had always known that Amara was more than just a princess. She was a leader, and now that leadership would take her down a path she had never imagined. "Then we'll go together," Klein said, his voice steady. "We'll find a way to make sure your people are safe, but we do it on our terms. No more running." Amara looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and determination. She had made her choice, and she knew the road ahead would be difficult. But she also knew that she wasn't alone anymore. She had Klein and a crew. Together, they would face whatever came next. As the ship's engines hummed to life, Klein and Amara stood side by side, ready to leave Varanus 7 behind. The future was uncertain, and the challenges ahead were unimaginable, but they were no longer afraid. They had survived the battle, and now they would survive the war. The crew gathered around them, their faces weary but resolute. The journey ahead would be long, but it was a journey they would take together. They would find a way to fight back, to protect what mattered. And no matter what the Empire threw at them, they would stand firm. For the first time in a long time, Amara felt something she hadn't known in years. Hope. It wasn't just for her people. It was for herself, for the future, and for the new family she had found in the most unlikely of places. Together, they were stronger than any enemy that stood in their way. The days after their departure from Varanus 7 were a blur. The crew of the medical ship had left behind a planet on the edge of war, and now they were headed toward an uncertain future. The ship hummed with activity as they worked tirelessly to stay ahead of the Empire's pursuit, but in the back of Klein's mind, there was only one thought that consumed him. They had no time to waste. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Amara's decision to leave behind her people and the world she had once ruled was not an easy one. Klein could see it in her eyes every time she gazed out into the vastness of space. She felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, but he could also see the quiet strength in her. As the ship sailed through the stars, Klein found himself increasingly concerned about the princess's well-being. She had fought valiantly during the battle on Varanus 7, but the strain of leading and fighting had taken its toll. She still wasn't fully healed, and her body was still recovering from the wounds she had sustained, but the weight of her decisions seemed to weigh heavier on her than any physical injury. One evening, after another long day of monitoring systems and strategizing their next move, Klein approached Amara as she sat alone in the observation room. The stars outside the window twinkled like distant diamonds, a breathtaking view that should have brought peace, but there was nothing peaceful about the look on Amara's face. "You're thinking about them, aren't you?" Klein asked, his voice soft. Amara didn't answer immediately. Her gaze remained fixed on the stars as she spoke. "I've always wondered what it would be like to be free, to not have the weight of my title and my people on my shoulders. But now that I've had the chance to run, I don't know if I'm any closer to freedom. I'm just lost." Klein sat down beside her, his gaze following hers out into the endless expanse of space. "You're not lost," he said quietly. "You're just finding your way. It's not easy, I know, but you're not alone anymore, Amara, and neither are your people. You've already shown them the strength to survive. That's more than most leaders can say." Amara turned her gaze toward him, and for the first time in days, her eyes softened. "You really believe that?" "I do," Klein replied, his voice steady. "You've been through more than most people could even imagine. But you've never given up. You won't start now." For a moment, the two of them sat in silence, the hum of the ship filling the space between them. The stars outside seemed to shimmer a little brighter, as if they, too, were offering their quiet encouragement. "I'm afraid," Amara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Afraid of failing. Afraid of losing more than I already have." Klein nodded, understanding her fear all too well. "We all have fears, Amara. It's how we face them that defines us. You've already faced down an empire, and you're still standing. That takes more strength than anyone could ever understand." Amara looked at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "And you? You're not what I expected, Dr. Klein. I thought humans were just, well, humans, but you've shown me something else. You've shown me that the things we thought we knew about each other aren't always true." Klein smiled back, his eyes warm. "We're all just trying to do what's right, in our own way. Maybe that's all we need to remember." Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden beep of the ship's communication system. Klein's heart skipped a beat as he stood up and moved quickly to the console. He recognized the call sign immediately. It was from one of the Allied resistance factions they had been in contact with before the battle on Varanus 7. He quickly activated the communication system, and the screen flickered to life, revealing a familiar face, a leader of the resistance group, Dr. Klein. The resistance leader said urgently, "We've got news. The Empire has mobilized. They're preparing to launch a full-scale attack on several systems, including ours. If we don't act now, they'll crush us." Klein's pulse quickened. "What do you need from us?" he asked without hesitation. "We need reinforcements, but more importantly, we need a plan. You've faced the Empire before. We need your expertise. The Princess. We need her leadership." Klein turned to look at Amara, who had been listening intently. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, there was no hesitation. No fear, just a quiet determination that Klein recognized as the same resolve that had burned in her when they first met. "I'm ready," Amara said, her voice steady. "We can't wait any longer. My people are counting on me. And now, I know what I have to do." Klein's heart swelled with pride. He had known from the moment he first found her that Amara was different. She wasn't just a princess, she was a leader, and this moment proved it. "Then we move out," Klein said, his voice strong. "We fight for your people. We fight for all of us." The next few hours were a blur of preparation as the crew rallied around Amara. They knew the risks, but they also knew the stakes. The Empire would stop at nothing to eliminate anyone who stood in their way. But this time, they had something the Empire didn't: unity. Klein watched as Amara took charge, her confidence and calm spreading to the crew. She had grown into her role as a leader, and now, her people would follow her. It didn't matter that she had been abandoned by her own kind. She had found a new family, one that would fight for her, just as she would fight for them. The ship's engines roared to life, once more as they set a course for the Resistance's base. Klein couldn't help but feel a sense of pride swell within him. They were no longer running. They weren't just surviving. They were fighting for a future. As the ship soared through the stars, Klein stood at the helm, watching the galaxy stretch out before him. The journey ahead would be difficult. The road to victory would be long.